This is the story of a 30-year search by U.S. intelligence agencies to perfect mind control.
This is LSD. Hi, I'm Tommy Rowe.
By now, it must be obvious to you, as it is to me, that
LSD is very powerful stuff.
there's some people who think that LSD is the greatest gift to mankind.
It's tutti frutti ice cream.
To tell you the complete story of these activities. We are professing to tell you the complete story that we know.
Right.
But these records that we've uncovered don't tell the story. They tell pieces of it.
The discovery was lysergic acid diethylamide.
LSD.
The film that you see is considered by many experts to be the closest illustration of the effects of a hallucinogenic.
The United States of America is one of the most powerful countries in the world, and intelligence is power. Much of this gathered intelligence has never seen the light of day, and it's hidden all over the United States in facilities the public is completely barred from. I'm your host, James, and these are the top 10 banned locations the CIA has forbidden you from visiting. And we're starting things off with the White House Situation Room. The Situation Room is the nerve center for the United States national security and crisis management. It may be an utter shock to you, but this place is off limits to the public, and even access by government officials is tightly controlled. Its main purpose is to provide the president with up-to-the-minute info during emergencies and crises, from military actions to natural disasters. The room is equipped with advanced communication technology, classified information systems, and video conferencing capabilities so that the president has all the necessary tools to make critical decisions. I'm picturing that scene in like every big budget action movie where there's a bunch of guys in suits sitting around a big table. There's a big like floating head talking about this is going on here and all these screens popping up. Probably doesn't look anything like that, but one can hope. Of course, anything top secret where the government is concerned has its fair share of conspiracies attached to it. One is that the Situation Room has secret archives containing information about extraterrestrial encounters or advanced technology. Another is that the Situation Room has been used for covert operations and shadowy government activities, which isn't really a conspiracy. That's just obviously exactly true. Number 9, the CocaCola Vault. Deep in the bowels of the World of Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta, there is a vault that houses one of the most top secret artifacts in the United States of America. Legend has it that this vault safeguards the secret recipe for Coca-Cola, the closely guarded elixir that has delighted the taste buds of not just Americans, but soda freaks from all over the world for over a century. The level of protection here is almost on par with Fort Knox, but of course, where there's a vault, there are bound to be whispers and rumors. Some suggest that the recipe is actually stored on an ancient scroll guarded by a mythical soda deity. Others wonder if the vault conceals a secret passage to a parallel soda universe. Unfortunately, unless you spend your days striving for employment at this establishment in order to tend to the vault yourself, you and I will never truly know what wonders are stored inside that place. There are wonders that are very much available to you right here on this channel, so hit that subscribe button. Now let's turn our attention to the legendary Fort Knox. This fortress was established in 1936 in Kentucky. It's a highly secure facility that houses a significant portion of the US government's gold reserves. It's surrounded by layers of defense. Its security measures include armed guards, electronic surveillance, and impenetrable vaults. The depository's primary purpose is to safeguard the nation's wealth, but what else could they be holding in there? One claim suggests that the gold within Fort Knox has actually been replaced with replicas in order to kind of avert everyone's attention from the real location of the goods. Another theory is that Fort Knox holds more than just gold. Classified documents, advanced technology, or even extraterrestrial artifacts safely hidden inside these impenetrable vaults. Number 7. Area 51. Hard to avoid talking about Area 51 in a list like this. Situated within the larger Edwards Air Force Base, Area 51 has been a hub for aircraft testing and pilot training since 1955. But as we all know, gaining entry into this place is basically impossible unless you work there. So what's happening inside those heavily guarded fences? Well, officially, it's about testing cutting-edge aircraft and training top-notch pilots. There may also be top-secret military planes and likely highly advanced technology housed in there as well. But the extraterrestrial angle is what fascinates the vast majority of people. Rumors have been swirling for ages that Area 51 is ground zero for UFO activity. According to many UFO and alien enthusiasts, this is where the government stashes crashed flying saucers and reverse engineers alien tech. Even though the government finally admitted Area 51 existed in the late 90s, it didn't exactly clear up all the mystery. Declassified documents spilled some of the beans about its aerospace research role, but the place still very much has this aura of intrigue around it. In at number 6, we have Club 33 in Disneyland. This Disneyland secret society adds a layer of mystery to the happiest place on Earth. Located in several Disney parks across the globe, Club 33 is a hidden oasis of luxury and exclusivity. The story goes that Club 33 was originally conceived as a private escape for Walt Disney to entertain special guests. Since its opening in 1967, it's become the stuff of theme park legend. Getting into Club 33 is no small feat. The entrance is unassuming, marked only by a simple address plaque and a discreet doorbell. Behind this unassuming facade lies a world of wonder, complete with a lavish dining area, exclusive events, and a balcony that offers a bird's eye view of the park. There are lots of urban legends about Club 33, that there are secret passages connecting the club to other parts of the park so that special guests can move through Disneyland out of the public eye. There's a pretty great story on Reddit about Club 33, in a thread asking folks who have worked there what the club is like. One Redditor chimed in saying he worked at Disneyland, and a coworker of his had gone to the bathroom in Club 33 and was very impressed with the fancy toilet paper, so he decided to take some of it home with him. And then from behind him he heard a voice say, "Make sure you leave some for me." Then he turned around and it was none other than Nicolas Cage, which you probably guessed based on my incredible impression. Next, we move on to the Los Alamos National Laboratory, a scientific powerhouse in the mountains of New Mexico. It was established as Project Y during World War II as part of the Manhattan Project. It's probably most famous for its work in nuclear research. Nuclear. Nobody likes how I pronounce nuclear. I say nuclear, and it's nuclear. Nuclear. And it's probably most famous for its work in nuclear research. It's a sprawling complex full of some of the world's top scientists. The laboratory has been at the forefront of developing groundbreaking technology with a primary focus on nuclear weapons. It's the birthplace of the atomic bomb. Today, Los Alamos dives into everything from national security and defense to cutting-edge scientific exploration, and there's no doubt they're working on some insane top secret projects in there. Classified technology and experiments that go way beyond what's publicly known. The Dugway Proving Ground. This facility was originally conceived as a testing site for chemical weapons during World War II. Over the years, its mission evolved to encompass a broader range of responsibilities, including the evaluation of defensive measures against biological and chemical threats. The facility became more prominent during the Cold War, when the threat of chemical and biological warfare was a real looming threat. It became a hub for research and testing aimed at developing effective countermeasures and protective gear. Dugway has vast and meticulously controlled testing grounds. The size of the area makes for a variety of simulations and scenarios, helping researchers and military understand the potential impacts of chemical and biological weapons in different conditions. Some speculate, though, that the facility is actually involved in experiments not just having to do with defense. Number 3, Camp Perry. Established during World War II to train Navy Seabees, things became far more covert during the Cold War. As for exactly what goes on there now, there's still a bit of mystery to it. In the early 50s though, the base underwent a transformation, becoming a key component in the world of intelligence gathering. The most well-known function of Camp Perry is its training facility for the CIA, often referred to as the farm. This secretive aspect of the base focuses on training CIA officers in the art of espionage, covert operations, and intelligence gathering. The site's remote location is ideal for this, adding an extra layer of security, shielding it from prying eyes. It's also classified as a black site, meaning it's a secret facility involved in covert activity. The base has, of course, been a breeding ground for speculation and conspiracy because of how heavily restricted it is. A significant portion of the activities going on there remain classified. There are theories that the base is involved in extraterrestrial research or that it houses advanced technology hidden from the public eye. The Nevada National Security Site, formerly known as the Nevada Test Site, this expansive area is used for the development and testing of nuclear weapons, located about 65 miles northwest of Las Vegas. The Nevada National Security Site has seen over 1,000 nuclear tests since its establishment in 1951. These tests range from above-ground explosions to underground experiments, and today the site is no longer used for active nuclear testing, but it's still used for various national security activities. The specifics of these activities are unsurprisingly classified. The Nevada National Security Site is managed by the National Nuclear Security Administration, or the NNSA, a branch of the U.S. Department of Energy. Access to the site is restricted, and it operates with a high level of security, which is good when there's nuclear bombs involved. And finally, we have the NRO, or the National Reconnaissance Office. Based in Virginia, the NRO is in the business of keeping an eye on things from way up there in the sky. And by things, I also mean us. They're the folks responsible for designing, building, and operating those hush-hush reconnaissance satellites that orbit the Earth. These satellites are high-tech eyes in the sky, capturing all sorts of intel from keeping tabs on potential threats to monitoring national disasters. Then they analyze the intel and pass the info on to other organizations like the CIA. Now, when it comes to secrecy, the NRO takes it to another level. They are very tight-lipped about the nitty-gritty details of their operations. Information is power, after all. The question on everyone's mind, of course, is what are these satellites really peeking at? The specifics are classified. It's clear, though, that the NRO plays a big role in national security. Access to information about the NRO's day-to-day operations is very limited, and that naturally fuels a lot of speculation. Like, just how much are they really paying attention to up there? All right. Comment shout out time. This was posted on our top 10 dark things found in Chernobyl, too scary for scientists video. If animals are growing extra limbs, why can't humans go there and get extra limbs? I would like another arm or two. You know what? I suggest that you give that a try. Get back to us, see how it goes. Don't actually. Or do. You know what? It's a free country. Just don't blame me, that's all.
There are some horrible people in the world, and we have rounded up 10 of the worst for ya. Here are the top 10 people the CIA fears the most. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Scott Erskin. We are starting off this list with truly one of the worst people I've ever heard about. Scott's story starts off when he was a child and suffered an injury that involved his head and brain. He seemed to recover fine physically, but continued to complain of headaches and that sort of thing, and it is unclear if these things were ever looked into further. At a very young age, he began to commit violent crimes against others that I truly cannot even speak about here on YouTube. He spent 4 years in prison for one of his crimes when he was around 17 years old, but when he was paroled after the 4 years, he immediately began committing crimes again. In 1993, Scott invited a woman who was waiting for the bus into his home and ended up holding her hostage for several days. After letting her go, he was quickly arrested and ended up being sentenced to 70 years in prison. This is when he had to submit DNA to a database, and in March of 2001, the DNA was matched when the cold cases of the unsolved murder murders of Jonathan Sellers and Charlie Keever were reopened. In 2004, a jury sentenced him to death, and 6 days later he was transferred to San Quentin. In an interesting turn of events, Scott did die on death row, but it wasn't due to a scheduled execution. Scott died a couple years ago in July of 2020 after contracting COVID-19. In our number 9 spot today, we have Dennis BTK Raider. The BTK killer, whose real name is Dennis Rader, was one of the worst serial killers from 1974 to 1991. He left taunting letters to police and newspapers where he described his crimes, but thankfully his annoyingly large and misplaced ego is what led to his demise. Because he craved the attention so badly, in 2004 he started communicating with the media again to try and be all smug or whatever, but this, combined with his utter lack of knowledge on how technology works, led to him being arrested in 2005. Imagine getting away with those crimes for so long and your ego and your own ignorance does you in the end. During his trial, he didn't apologize for his crimes, but he did describe them in full detail, which is horrifying and honestly very unnerving. After his trial, he ended up being sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences with a minimum of 175 years. When Raider was first arrested and police were taking him to the station, an officer asked him, "Mr. Raider, do you know why you're going downtown?" To which he replied, "Oh, I have suspicions why." Ew. In our number 8 spot today, we have Chester Turner. Chester is an American serial killer who, on April 30th, 2007, was convicted of taking the lives of 11 women in the Los Angeles area, and on June 19th, 2014, he was convicted of 4 more that they were able to tie back to him. He has been referred to by prosecutors as one of the most prolific serial killers in the city's history, and if you know Los Angeles's history with things like that is not something to take lightly. In his original trial that led to conviction, Chester was sentenced to death, but at the following one in 2014, he also received an additional death sentence. In the end, like with a lot of these kinds of stories, DNA came to save the day and help authorities find out who was committing these horrible, horrible crimes. In our number 7 spot today, we have Gary Ridgeway. This horrible human being is also sometimes known as the Green River Killer, and his crimes took place somewhere between 1982 to potentially as recent as 2001. He was convicted of 49 crimes but confessed to an unbelievable 71, which makes him the second most prolific serial killer in the United States in terms of confirmed killings. Most of his victims were either sex workers or women in other vulnerable circumstances, and through DNA profiling evidence, in 2001, authorities were able to connect him to 4 of his crimes. From there, they made a deal with him where they would spare him the death sentence in exchange for disclosure of the location of all of the missing women. Gary took the deal and was spared the death sentence, and instead was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Not only did he say that he chose the type of victims he did because they were, quote, easy to pick, and that he, quote, hated most of them, but he also called his crimes his career. I hate him. In our number 6 spot today, we have Charles Ng. Charles' story really starts off shortly after he moved to the United States on a student visa. He dropped out after his first semester, and soon after he was involved in a hit-and-run accident. He then tried to avoid prosecution by enlisting in the United States Marine Corps, using false documents that stated his birthplace was within the United States. He was arrested by military police a year later for stealing automatic weapons, and then somehow he escaped custody, headed back towards Northern California, and this is where he met Leonard Lake, who is another real piece of work. Charles did end up going away and serving a bit of time, but it was only 18 months, and then he was back with Leonard, and that is when the two started their crime spree together. It is believed that together the pair took the lives of somewhere from 11 to 25 different people. When Leonard was caught and brought in for questioning, he sneakily took a cyanide pill he had hidden in his jacket and took his own life, but Charles ended up standing trial. He was convicted for 11 of the killings, and he remains on death row at San Quentin. In our number 5 spot today, we have Robert Pickton. This horrible person is one of the worst Canadians to ever live and is one of our country's worst serial killers ever. Pickton dropped out of school and began working at his family's pig farm, and this is where most of his absolutely horrific crimes took place. He was first arrested in 2002 and was convicted in 2007 of taking the lives of 6 people, but throughout an extremely lengthy investigation, evidence of many more killings came to light. During his time in jail, an undercover police officer posed as his cellmate, and Pickton confessed to 49 crimes to him. Apparently, he was saying to the undercover officer that he wanted to take one more life to make it an even 50 50, and that he only got caught because he was sloppy. The entire trial was a bit of a mess, but it led to a life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years, which was the longest possible sentence under Canadian law at the time. This unfortunately does mean that he will be eligible for parole within the next decade, so let's hope that never ever happens. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Golden State Killer. The Golden State Killer is one of the most well-known serial killers ever, and that is never a good thing. From 1973 to 1986, the GSK was responsible for taking the lives of 13 people, harming 50, and 120 different burglaries all across California. Throughout the investigation process, he used different tactics to both taunt and threaten police and the victims, which is just on a whole other disgusting level. Through recent genetic testing, like those 23andMe things, the identity of the GSK was finally revealed after years and years of investigations. Basically, they uploaded a DNA profile that they were able to get from the crime scenes to the website GED Match. They were able to find 10 to 20 people who had the same great-great-great-grandparents as a match. And then from there, the genealogist made a large family tree, and from there, they were then able to single out 2 main suspects. After covertly collecting DNA samples from one of the suspects and comparing them with the crime scene DNA, they were finally able to arrest Joseph James D'Angelo, who is the Golden State Killer. After decades of waiting, the victims of his crimes were finally able to see justice served, as he was sentenced to 12 life sentences plus 8 years. He was spared the death penalty because he admitted to numerous crimes that he had perpetrated, some of which he wasn't even being charged for. He is now 75 years old and will definitely spend the rest of his life in prison. In our number 3 spot today, we have Rodney Alaka. Rodney is a horrible monster who was convicted and sentenced to death for 5 killings that he committed in California from 1977 to 1979. He also received an additional 25 years to life after pleading guilty to 2 other killings in New York from 1971 to 1977. Rodney got away with his crimes for a while because he wasn't the top of the list of suspects because he was said to be the, quote, charming photographer. Rodney is often referred to as the dating game killer because of his appearance on the show, which, with what we now know about him, is absolutely horrifying. What's even crazier is that he actually won the show he was on, but the episode's bachelorette refused to go on a date with him because she found him, quote, creepy. This is just a reminder to always trust your instincts. It isn't exactly known just how many victims Rodney had. It is potentially thought that it could be much higher than the number he was convicted for. In July of last year, Rodney passed away in prison at the age of 77. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Zodiac Killer. This one had to make it on this list today because while there are a plethora of terrifying people on this list, nothing is as terrifying as an uncaught serial killer, and the Zodiac is definitely the most prolific of them all. The Zodiac Killer took the lives of 5 people in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969. He was most known for targeting young couples or a lone male cab driver. Despite 2 people luckily and thankfully escaping his attempted evil doings, he has still never been caught. He was one of those losers who left notes and stuff for the police to find. I like that they think they're being all cool and clever and brave while they do that. Like, if you're so brave and almighty and unafraid, then show us your face. While no one has heard from the Zodiac since 1974, the case remains active in many different countries, and maybe one day we'll finally know who the real Zodiac is. In our number 1 spot today, we have Robert Hanson. Robert is often referred to as the Butcher Baker, and his story truly is horrific. He is one of the most prolific serial killers in Alaska's history because, for over a decade, he would kidnap women and bring them into the wilderness where he would then stalk them like prey. I am just now realizing that there is definitely an episode of Criminal Minds about this guy. Sometimes the premise is just so dark that it sticks with you. The reason he got away with his crimes for so long is because outside of these horrific things, he was just a soft-spoken baker. One of my best friends has the nicest, most kind bakers for parents, and now I'm starting to feel a little suspicious. Might want to look into them, Robin. Robert was heading to church by day and prowling strip clubs at night looking for the next person to take. What led to the downfall of this horrible monster was a badass named Cindy Paulson who was able to escape from Robert and was sure to leave evidence behind. She then went to authorities and told them what happened, and this led to a search warrant for Robert's property, which is where all the evidence they needed lied. Robert is believed to have taken the lives of at least 17 women, and in 1983 he was sentenced to 461 years and a life sentence without the possibility of parole.
Hello everybody, I'm your host Woody, and today we're going to be taking a look at the top 10 secret projects the government tried to cover up. Today we are going to be focusing specifically on Central Intelligence Agency or CIA projects. Let's get into it. Number 10, Project Stargate. If you've watched Stranger Things, then this one probably sounds familiar to you. In the show, 11 started off as an experiment to psychically spy on the Russians, and turns out this was actually real. In the 1970s in California and later in Maryland, the CIA recruited numerous men and women who claimed they had ESP, or extrasensory perception. People with ESP typically say that they can read minds or move objects without touching them. They were recruited to try and help uncover military and domestic intelligence secrets. Mostly they just wanted them to spy on the Russians by reading their minds. The government covered it up, of course, because why would they want people knowing they're trying to use magic powers to win a war? But in 2017, when 12 million pages of records were declassified, all of the information about the so-called Project Stargate became public knowledge. People learning that they had been using the men and women to locate hostages and even track fugitives throughout the states. Number 9, Vault 7. Vault 7 was definitely never meant to make it to the public eye, but unfortunately for the CIA, it got leaked. So what actually is Vault 7? Back in 2017, WikiLeaks started releasing a series of CIA documents. Vault 7 was a group of documents that contained hacking systems that were either developed or otherwise obtained by the CIA. For the most part, it should make you wary of your technology and how the government is using it. Many people know that apps will track our searches and data to learn about us and maybe even sell it to malicious companies, but it's much more than that. Weeping Angel has the ability to turn a Samsung television into a recording device, even if it appears that your television is switched off. Vault 7 also contained the ability to intercept all your iPhone messages before they got encrypted through apps like WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram. And according to the documents, the CIA can allegedly take over your phone by exploiting vulnerabilities, but Apple has said that they patch these vulnerabilities as soon as they're aware of them. Number 8, Battalion 316. Intelligence Battalion 316 went through a few different names throughout its existence, but it was pretty much always functioning for the same reason. They were an army unit in Honduras that was responsible for carrying out political assassinations, and even kidnapping and causing pain to people who were seen as potential political competition throughout the 1980s. The group received both support and training from the CIA, even receiving their training at United States military bases. They were a military kill squad that definitely wasn't known for being friendly, committing various crimes like terrorism, misogyny, ethnic cleansing, and even so-called crimes against humanity. Their goal to remain in power in Honduras failed, leaving behind a long list of innocent victims. In 1996, members of the US Congress asked President Bill Clinton to release the documentation about the country's involvement with the human rights violations that took place in Honduras, and this is when we learned about the battalion. Number 7, MKUltra. Let's once again return to the Red Scare and the United States fight against Russians and communism. During the Cold War, they came under the belief that the communists had invented a drug that would allow them to control human minds, and the US wanted a piece of that, starting their own research into the technique under the name Project MKUltra, trying to find their own mind control substance that could be turned into a weapon. It ran from the 50s to the 60s and led to many unknowing or even unwilling subjects being given illicit substances. The experiments were apparently covertly funded in American universities and research facilities, but it turns out that the experiments also took place in prisons and detention centers in the US, Japan, Germany, and the Philippines. The goal was to destroy the current mind and replace it with something new. Attempts included using electric shocks and illicit substances. For some, the experiments were fatal, and many others had their lives completely changed. Number 6, Operation Cyclone. Operation Cyclone became known as one of the longest and most expensive covert operations taken on by the CIA, costing around $630 million per year for a whole decade. So what was Operation Cyclone, and why was the government pouring pouring so much cash into it. It was an operation that worked to arm and finance militant Islamic groups during the military intervention by the USSR. The goal was to aid anti-Soviet resistances outside of the United States. They gave loans, aircrafts, weapons, and other military assistance to the groups in Afghanistan, costing the United States government billions of dollars for these so-called care packages. Eventually, the Soviets were pushed out of Afghanistan, but conspiracy was still spinning. Many of the weapons ended up being sold in local markets instead of going to the rebels, and some people believe that Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda received assistance from the US military. Number 5. Operation Ajax. In the 1950s, a coup took place in Iran, and the CIA documents about it weren't released until they were pressured to a total 64 years later. As it turns out, the agency played a large role in the coup that led to the end of the current Iranian prime minister, a rise in nationalism, and sour US-Iranian relationships remaining into the 21st century. The motivation was oil. The US and UK wanted Iran's oil, but their new prime minister made it inaccessible to them, so the two countries conspired to overthrow him and get their oil back. The coup seemed to fail, and the CIA sent a message to their base in Iran calling it off, but the CIA officer who received it said, "Nah, we're not done here." So the next day, with crowds allegedly hired by the CIA, the coup, or Operation Ajax, went through and the prime minister was overthrown, the monarchy and oil fields restored in the country, anti-Western sentiment also being restored and growing to new and extreme levels. Number 4. The Five Eyes. Are you familiar with one of the farthest reaching intelligence and espionage agencies in the world? You are probably a part of it and don't even know it. It is the once secret Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance. After World War II, the US and UK came together to create an information sharing alliance as a result of how important communication was for them during the war effort. And in 1956, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand were added to this group. The classification status on these documents was USA, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, eyes only. And that was obviously a bit wordy, so they shortened it down to Five Eyes. It has been operating for 70 years now and is used for surveillance and sharing classified information between the 5 countries. The alliance was especially important during the Cold War, when the countries shared a lot of information like the location of Soviet weapons in North America. The alliance was kept a secret until documents of the original UK and USA agreement were released back in 2010. Number 3. Operation PB Success. Similarly to Operation Ajax, Operation PB Success was a covert CIA military operation that took place in another country, this time Guatemala. This was another coup that took place only a year after the one in Iran in 1954. At the time, Guatemala had a very new democracy, only being on their second democratically elected president, but the United States saw him as a threat, this being due to his allowance of the Guatemalan Communist Party to act freely and land reform movements that threatened US industries. The CIA then worked through various different plans of action to overthrow the Guatemalan government, including assassination and faking tensions between the country and Honduras. They spread false information, placed anonymous phone calls, and hired anti-communist students to create a fake opposition. Eventually, the president stepped down and their democracy was seen as unfavorable. The United States training that the Guatemalan military now had led to a war lasting decades, tearing apart the country. But PB Success was a success as it worked, and they were able to deny CIA involvement until the documents were released in 1997. Number 2. The Secret War. We're once again fighting communism, this time in Vietnam, but while the Vietnam War was taking place, a smaller secret war was taking place in Laos, attempting to stop communism from spreading to Southeast Asia. The Americans essentially used the countries of Laos and Cambodia to fight their own war against northern Vietnam and communism, using their tribes as their soldiers. While it was clear that the small armies had no hopes of truly winning against northern Vietnam, the United States and the CIA continued on with their fight, devastating the country and peoples of Laos and Cambodia. They came out of the war with their land and lives completely lost and changed, but but the CIA wrote it down in their history books as a success, disregarding the country's sacrifice. The CIA's historical retrospective on the situation not being released until many years later. Number 1. Operation Condor. It's the Cold War again, and the United States government are fighting against terrorism, this time under the code name Operation Condor. It was a campaign of political repression and so-called state terror that was backed by the US and CIA. It involved many heinous activities like kidnapping, killings, political espionage, and much more, all taking place throughout South America. The CIA chose to describe it as a cooperative effort by the intelligence/security services of several South American countries to combat terrorism and subversion, but really it was a lot more than that. Condor's key members were Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, and later Brazil. The United States provided them with planning, coordination, technical support, and military training, all routed through the CIA. It led to many military dictatorships and numerous deaths throughout South America. And there is so much detail and information on this one that if you want it, you're just gonna have to look it up for yourself.
Welcome back to Most Amazing Top 10. I'm your host, Taylor McWaters, and we have a dark one, it seems. Let's do it. Here are the top 10 evil people that terrify the CIA the most. Let's do it. Number 10, Albert Fish. Albert is one of the oldest people on this list, but that does not mean his crimes were any less horrific than anyone else's. Yeah, he was nicknamed the Brooklyn Vampire, or the Moon Maniac, or the Boogeyman. By its name alone, you could probably guess what he did to bodies. Yeah, it's horrible. I can't even talk about it on YouTube. Albert was a terrible human being who did terrible things. Now, in the early 1900s, Albert was arrested, tried, and convicted for killing and consuming 3 people, but the horror was not over yet. Yeah. No, Albert began to claim that although people knew about 3, that number, the real number, was actually close to 100 victims. And he even claimed that he had some in every single state, which is impossible to find now, honestly, and it's horribly disgusting to think about. To make matters even worse, as if it wasn't already terrible enough, he also sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims, and he detailed everything about how he lured the victim in and the rest of these horrible things that occurred afterwards. Number 9, the alphabet. Yet to be identified. Guess I'm not sleeping tonight. Yeah, we're talking cold cases in this list. We're talking unsolved crimes right now, and we're talking about one of the worst. The alphabet killings are a series of unsolved crimes named because of how each victim had first initials that matched their last. So like their first and last name started with the same letter, that type of thing. Details on how the lives were taken and where the remains were placed afterwards, it just connected, right? They were all taken in a similar area around the same time. There are theories and suspects as to who could have committed these horrific crimes, but as of right now, no one knows for sure. These crimes were committed between 1971 and 1973 in Rochester, New York, and because of the timing, it's possible that whoever committed these crimes could still be alive, and perhaps they're not. Who knows? Number 8, Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez had a very difficult life growing up. He committed a plethora of horrifying crimes throughout South America during the 1970s. By the time the 80s rolled around, as he made a mistake during one of his awful crimes, this led to his arrest. Now, once in police custody, he spilled everything on basically his entire life and confessed to an insane amount of crimes. Like, we're talking 240 killings on top of the 110 that they already suspected him of. Police were a little skeptical of just how many crimes he said he committed, but Pedro was able to lead them to a mass grave where they recovered a total of 53 people's remains. So, you know, they're probably gonna believe the rest of it. Pedro, of course, went to jail, but get this, he was somehow released in 1994, which is absolutely insane. He was sent to some sort of mental institution for 3 years after, but he was also released from there on good behavior. So aside from the crimes he committed and the fact that they let him go, are you ready for the worst part? In 2002, he was suspected of being the perpetrator of a new crime, but no one has been able to find him since 1998. Number 7, the Long Island Killer. What would a list of horrifying people be without some of the most dreaded unidentified serial killers, right? The most unidentified ones are always the most creepy. The Long Island Killer, of course, operated in the Long Island region and is said to have begun being active right back in the 1996 area, and it's entirely possible that they may currently still be active. Again, it's so recent where it's like, possibly. Recent enough? Maybe. At the moment, there's a range of 10 to 17 crimes that authorities believe could be linked to this yet to be identified person. Unfortunately, there's not much that's known about this person or who they might be or anything like that, although it's currently thought that they're likely a white male in his mid-20s to 40s with extensive knowledge of law enforcement operations and techniques, and they believe this because it would make sense as to why he's been so successful in avoiding capture so far. Number 6, the Doodler. The nickname that this unidentified killer received is due to his practice of sketching his victims before taking their lives. This unidentified killer committed their crimes in the San Francisco area from January 1974 to September 1975, and they specifically targeted the LGBTQ community. It's believed that 14 deaths can be attributed to this killer while 3 others were injured in the process. Unfortunately, because of stigma and the sensitivity sensitivities surrounding gay men at the time, the three who did survive this monster were very reluctant when speaking with authorities for fear of being, outed as a result of it. This has led, of course, to there being little information for them to work with in terms of identifying the man responsible. For a while, there was a primary suspect, but that person has never been officially charged because sadly, none of the survivors felt comfortable enough to testify in court. There's a very real chance that authorities know who the killer is, but just don't have the evidence yet to prove it in a court of law. The most terrifying thought of all. Number 5. Tex Watson. Tex Watson was one of the central members of the Manson family, which was led, of course, by Charles Manson, and was a willing participant for all of those crimes, specifically the crimes that took place August 9th and 10th, 1969. In October 1969, Tex knew his arrest was coming, so he fled to his home state of Texas, but was later arrested and then, sent back to California, of course. Now, once he was in California, he refused to talk or eat and ended up losing 55 pounds, which got him sent to get tested to see if he was fit to stand trial, which at that time he was. In 1971, he was convicted on 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit. He originally received a death sentence, but it ended up being a commuted to life in prison sentence. While in prison, apparently this guy's been living the life, it seems, because not only has he been able to release a book while inside, but he also got married, and through visits, he fathered 4 children with her. Number 4. Richard Ramirez. Richard, who is also known as the Night Stalker, was a serial killer who terrorized the streets of LA back in the 80s. He was known for invading homes, which left him initially being dubbed as the walk-in killer, but he had another signature that was, of course, concerning to many people. This was during the height of the Satanic Panic, so yeah, buckle up. Richard was known for leaving behind different satanic messages at the scene of all of his crimes. Because of his satanic signature, after he left his first pentagram at the scene of a crime, authorities became worried that he was a Charles Manson copycat. But instead, he was just his own, one-of-a-kind monster. It is said that he would leave more pentagrams behind while also telling his victims to swear to Satan instead of swearing to God. During his court appearances, he would hold up a pentagram, and after pleading not guilty, he said, "Hail Satan." Number 3. Charles Cullen. He used to be a nurse, and he took the lives of his patients throughout his career, and he may be one of the worst serial killers ever recorded. He confessed to taking the lives of 40 people, but through following interviews, it became apparent that the number was way higher than 40. Yeah, he just couldn't remember the names of them all. Yeah, just that many he couldn't remember. But he of course could remember the details of his crimes against them. His crimes started in 1988 and spanned over a decade into 2003. In October 2003, when a patient passed away from low blood sugar, the authorities were called. This person was Charles' final victim, and authorities began looking into him and investigating his past employment history. On December 12, 2003, authorities were arresting him and charging him with only 1 count of his crimes, but he ended up admitting to 40. He ended up pleading guilty to his crimes and arranged a plea deal where authorities would not seek the death penalty if he cooperated. During one of his court proceedings, he continually asked the judge to step down, and apparently he repeatedly chanted, "Your Honor, you need to step down." He repeatedly chanted that over and over, 25 minutes straight. Even after he was restrained and gagged for his outbursts, he kept going. It's thought that his victims might be up in the 400 range, which is truly just unbelievable and so tragic. But Charles was sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences and will be eligible for parole in 2403. Nice. Number 2. Adenan Kok. This Turkish serial killer is responsible for taking the lives of 11 women who were all between the ages of 68 and 95. He was also responsible for 6 other crimes that were, of course, also elderly women, sadly, so there's a horrible theme going on here in his life. It's absolutely disgusting. Now, down the road, he eventually gets caught for said horrible crimes, and he was sentenced to 6 death sentences as well as 40 years in prison. Now, this was back in 1995 when he was first sentenced, but cut to 2004, the death penalty in Turkey was abolished, which meant that in May 2005, Adenan Kok was released from jail. And finally, number 1, Charlene Gallo. A match made in hell, it seems. Here we go. Back in the late 70s, Charlene Gallo, alongside her twisted husband, Gerald, they were the worst in Sacramento, California. They kidnapped and then later killed 10 victims. But when they kidnapped them, they kept them and then they abused them for a while horribly before ultimately ending their lives. It really was the most twisted situation possible. Just disgusting people. Now, cut to 1984, Charlene pleads guilty to murder and receives 16 years. Her husband was waiting for execution, but he died of cancer before meeting that fate, so nice. But Charlene, she got out and moved to Fair Oaks, California, where she has since changed her name. So we have no idea where she is or who she is. So you can sleep.
Holy moly, here we are again. It should be no surprise that one video wasn't enough. I mean, we're talking about the government doing experiments behind your back. Of course, there has been a ton of this going on without us knowing, but as time passes, it seems that the info drips into the public, and we all learn of the horrors that take place in places where no one's looking. Hello again, Most Amazing Top 10 family. I'm your host, Pedro Lopez, and welcome back to Most Amazing Top 10. Today, we're going to be taking a second look at the horrors that the CIA has been hiding from us with our list of top 10 mysterious experiments conducted by the CIA Part 2. If you at home want some more top 10 content, you should head over to our Instagram and Facebook pages and stick around until the end of this list because I'm going to be reading out some questions from my Instagram inbox. If you want me to answer your questions, you can hit me up through the gram. Without taking any longer, let's get into this list. Coming in at number 10, we have malodorants. You remember those things you could buy at the corner store when you were a kid? Things like stink bombs or fart spray. You could let them off in the class and everyone would start running away because it would smell like rotten eggs. Well, the military and the CIA have been working on one that could clear out a whole building. Malodorants are basically the souped up version of the corner store prank tool. The purpose of a malodorant is to clear out an entire area of people, and usually the gas is invisible. This can be used as a non-lethal crowd control tool. You have a building full of dudes holding someone hostage, send in a massive stink bomb, and then they will have a hard time sticking around once they smell the absolutely putrid stench that comes along with it. These malodorants have been known to make people vomit from how horrible they smell. They haven't become standard practice because if you send in your own dudes, unless they have gas masks on, they are going to be blasted with the same level of stink. Not to mention, it's going to get stuck in everyone's clothes. Coming in at number 9, we have the Inner Armor program. I'm sure many of you have seen some videos of real life superheroes. People who can see extremely far, people who can withstand insane amounts of electricity running through their body, or people like Wim Hof, the Iceman, who can withstand extremely cold temperatures for times that would kill anyone else. Well, the CIA, DARPA, and many other branches of the American military are interested in these people. Don't worry, they're not about to take them from their homes and then do a bunch of tests on them, but they do want to have soldiers that can do all of this and more. The idea of the Inner Armor program is to make soldiers that can withstand the most brutal conditions with only their bodies. To be able to take on harsh weather in every sense, whether it be cold or hot, or even some sort of horrible disease blowing in the wind. The Inner Armor program looks into new ways that the CIA can have people who are nearly indestructible. Coming in at number 8, we have booby traps. It should be no surprise that the CIA has come up with a bunch of fun and interesting ways to kill people. I mean, it's the CIA. The whole MO is to come in super sneaky and then take someone out without anyone knowing. Well, that's at least what the movies have me believe. Every day working for the CIA is like being in a James Bond movie, right? Well, one person who was high on the CIA hit list was Fidel Castro. That should be no surprise to anyone. The Cuban leader was running the communist country closest to America in a time where the communists were enemy numero uno. So the CIA went to work on experimenting with all sorts of ways they could booby trap things to cause his death. One of the most inventive was the idea that they can make an elaborate seashell that was so breathtaking that the leader would have to come and pick it up. This seashell would be attached to some sort of explosive device and then boom! Castro is gone. But this experiment never came to fruition. Coming in at number 7, we have the Avro Canada VZ9 Avro car. This doesn't happen all the time, but every now and again America and Canada come together to work on some new military toys, and this experimental car was one of the strangest. The Avro Canada VZ9 Avro car was basically a flying saucer. It was shaped like a disc and would hover in the air like something that was pulled right out of a movie. The whole thing was pretty impressive, but they couldn't get the controls just right, and this led to the machine having the tendency to crash, which is not something you want out of your flying car. Now, they said the whole thing was but I wouldn't be surprised if there was an old dusty one of these sitting in a warehouse somewhere. Coming in at number 6, we have drug experiments. We covered MKUltra in our last video, so we won't be going anywhere near that, but something that has been linked to the CIA was the perfecting of crack cocaine. But shouldn't the American government be fighting against the drugs, not trying to make them more potent? Well, it turns out that isn't the truth. A famous story broken open by reporter Gary Webb called Dark Alliances covered how the CIA was not only obtaining cocaine from South and Central America, but they were also turning it into crack and then selling it to poor black communities to not only profit off them, but also try and destroy their communities and demonize them in the press. I mean, how is the CIA still running? They have been looking at all our digital information for years, and they also have been trying to destroy entire populations. They don't really sound like the good guys. Coming in at number 5, we have Project Ice Storm. We all know that during the Cold War, America and Russia were at each other's throats like Bart and Lisa. Because of this, America wanted every edge against the Soviets, and part of this meant positioning themselves in the perfect spot to hit the Soviets with nukes before they could ever launch anything at them. You gotta beat them to the punch, baby! One of the greatest heavyweights of all time once said, "Everyone's got a plan till you hit them in the mouth." The Americans figured they could do this by building secret nuclear launch bases in the ice wall in Greenland. They were gonna have nukes pump into the ice and then smash into Russia like a big time sneak attack. Now, this would have been perfect, but the ice was moving too quickly, so they had to abandon the project. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a secret polar nuke base hidden somewhere right now. Or what if nukes aren't even that big of a deal anymore? What if they have lasers that come off of satellites now? Coming in at number 4, we have Operation Top Hat. Chemical warfare is always a fear. It is one of the most deadly ways you can engage with the enemy, and in most cases it is seen as illegal. But that doesn't mean you don't want to be ready for it. For this operation, the CIA and American military worked together to try and come up with a way to treat people who've been exposed to chemical weapons. They took people and exposed them to mustard gas and other harsh chemicals and then tried experimental treatments on them to see what would happen. One of the most brutal parts of this experiment was that the people who were having this done to them had no idea they were part of an experiment. That has to be one bad day at the office. You come in for some regular training and the next thing you know you're being blasted in the face with a war crime. Coming in at number 3, we have nuclear testing. The military and the CIA have been doing nuclear testing for years, and it should be no surprise because when you come across the most destructive tool on the planet, you're going to want to make sure you know how to use it, and on top of that, you probably want to blow it up because it just looks cool as hell. I'm not advocating the use of nuclear weapons, but seeing one of those bad boys blow up would be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But the CIA and several other branches of the American government wanted to know how to make the most powerful nuke and what the best way was to use one of these extremely destructive devices. How they went about it was absolutely disgusting. On more than one occasion, nuclear testing took place where small island tribes lived, and the standing nuclear damage was devastating to their people. Coming in at number 2, we have exoskeletons. Why only have a skeleton on the inside of your body when you could also have a cool robot one on the outside too? That is what I'm talking about. We need to get the power on the outside so we can jump from building to building like I'm in the Matrix. Well, apparently the CIA funded a program that was doing research into exoskeletons. They wanted to send out spies into the field that looked like they were pulled out of The Surge. No one will understand that reference. And coming in at the number 1 spot, we have Operation Northwood. Here's an experiment that will scare the hell out of you. So the Americans were in a stalemate with Cuba and Russia, and the American people were anti-communist, but they weren't ready to go to war with these places. So there was an experimental idea proposed that fake terrorist attacks should be launched on American soil to have the media blame it on Cuba, and then they would get the public behind an invasion of Cuba. Quite an insane experiment if you ask me. Thankfully the whole idea was kiboshed by JFK and then put to bed, but JFK was assassinated, so I wonder what happened to this plan in the long run. Many people who love the world of conspiracy theories think that this kind of plan could have been used in other terrorist attacks against America. Alright everyone, that has been our list, and as promised I'm going to be reading out some questions from my Instagram inbox. Vanny ST wrote in and asked, what's your hidden talent? This is hard to think of, but I think I'm excellent at being annoying. Once I get to know you, I can figure out exactly how to annoy you in the perfect way, and I can just get in there like a mosquito flying too close to your ear. You're just gonna hear me again and again and again. Just ask Ayman Hassan how perfectly annoying I can be. Little Bear 6070 wrote in and asked, Totino's or Hot Pockets? And I think I gotta go with Totino's pizza rolls on this one. Those things are insanely good. I saw a meme once that called them Italian gushers, and I was like, dude, that is so true. Also, I saw a video where someone took Totino's and tossed them in like butter and Parmesan and other seasonings, and it looked like one of the greatest things on the planet. But with both those options, you have to be very careful because they can explode in your mouth and make your whole face full of lava. And finally, Ajax Olaf wrote in and asked, are you Christian? And the answer is no. I think my dad was Baptist and my mom was like Christian or Catholic. I can't really remember, but religion wasn't something they ever talked about. Not in a way where it wasn't welcome. It just wasn't something either of them cared about, so I grew up with pretty much zero exposure to religion. Most of what I know about it I've learned in my adult life, but even that is very little. I really don't know about religion, but if I had to classify myself, I think I would go with agnostic, as I have no idea what's going on and I just keep doing me. Alright everyone, that has been our list. Thank you all so much for tuning in. As always, I would love it if you could like, comment, subscribe, and hit the little notification bell. Until next time, I've been your host, Chedarena, and watch out for those CIA experiments.